your kids won't be middle class, and so they'll never want to live below that means.
100%.
So that's the next.
It's a standard. We talk about it a lot with like, well, my daughters.
Yeah,
it's like the biggest joke in the sense of just like, well, you know, eventually they do get married and stuff like that, and it's a real fine line between like spoiling them and really keeping them, you know what I mean, level in the sense of just like as a dad, like, you know, you want the best for your kids, especially your daughters. So at what point are you spoiling the shit out of them? Because that's just a high standard to live up to. But some of the dopest, you know, girls that I've met in my life have been the most humblest, have been the most, you know, sometimes not aggressive, but very, very down to earth. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, but then you think about fucking like their spouse. What if their spouse is a complete bum? But they love them. Like that hurts. All right, no inheritance.
Fuck.
Like that's a real like. And now that like you're at this place, and we have to start thinking generationally.
You just got to learn how to identify bums, dog. Like your
like,
kids got to be able to identify bums. Your kids should never be hanging around bums. At the end of the day,
right? I mean, but you say that, and then I know very successful people whose kids turn into heroin addicts. Like, I mean, like there's all these different variables to where, like, oh man,
exposure though.
Exposure.
I think exposure mitigates a lot of those when you start to. Well, fuck. it can increase it or it can mitigate it, right? Exposure in a sense of, you know, they know of it. You've had those conversations with them, but also in a sense of like not holding them back. Because a lot of it does come out of retaliation or, you know, oh, I can't, so I'm going to do it or I'm going to try it. And then they try the wrong shit. And then that's what ends up being, you know, bad for them. So I think just understanding that as a parent, like, you know, we can't raise our kids the same way that we were raised because that really is only how we know how to raise a child is how you were raised.
Except unless you
educate yourself on it. You know what I mean? And I think Dwayne Wade had an interview on a podcast before where he talked about how just as a parent, your biggest thing is to really learn from your child for the most part, right? You still want to be a disciplinarian and stuff like that, but your job is just to love unconditionally.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with, you know, what they decide to date, who they decide to date, what gender, what race they decide to date. Like none of that has anything to do with you because at the end of the day, it comes down to your child's happiness. So how do you best allow your child to be happy? In a safe way, in a sense, in a safe way, right?
Not to fuck it off.
Yeah, not to fuck it off. But again, one of the questions he asked was, "Am I?" Because his son is I think transgender.
Yeah.
So his daughter. I'm sorry, and so he said, you know, is he against it because it makes him feel uncomfortable, or is it because he's afraid of how people will respond to her? And it all boiled down to it makes me feel uncomfortable. Well, we can't raise our children because something makes us feel uncomfortable. Because you're afraid, you change the way that you raise your child. You know what I mean? Your job is just to love unconditionally, whatever that means. If they're happy, you bump if you feel uncomfortable. They feel 100% comfortable. All they wanted you to do was love. And they said, especially like around transgender, like in just gays and stuff like that. Dynamic. But they just said, like, you know, there's kids, you know, committing suicide at a high rate.
I mean,
just because of acceptance from their parents. Fuck the world.
Their
parents didn't just love them, or just you don't have to understand it, but your job is to love your child. You know, everyone has their views. I get it. Love your child.